The late September sun hung low over Crystal Lake like a dying ember, casting the Montana wilderness in shades of copper and blood. The water was cold enough to make breathing difficult, cold enough to turn skin blue, cold enough to kill a woman if she stayed in too long. Sister Grace Morrison had been in that water for nearly 3 hours now, her arms wrapped around her chest, her teeth chattering so violently she could barely form words. She had long since stopped crying. The tears had frozen on her cheeks, and besides, what was the point? No one could hear her out here. No one except God, and he seemed to have stopped listening a long time ago. On the shore, 15 feet up in the branches of a twisted pine tree, her black habit fluttered in the wind like a flag of surrender. Her white coif dangled from another branch, mocking her. The four men who had put them there were long gone, their laughter still echoing in her memory, their words cutting deeper than the cold water ever could. Grace closed her eyes against the memory, but it did no good. She could still see their faces, flushed with whiskey and cruelty, still see the way they had looked at her body with disgust so pure it was almost admiration. Colt Brennan, the ringleader, son of the richest man in 3 territories. Jake Riley, Tyler Vance, and Mason Holt, all cut from the same cloth of privilege and meanness. They had found her bathing in this hidden lake, the one place she thought she could be alone, the one place she thought she could let her guard down. She had been wrong. They had taken everything, her clothes, her dignity, her horse, even the small satchel containing the few personal items she owned. They had thrown her habit and coif up into the tree like it was a game, whooping and hollering as they took turns trying to get the black fabric to catch on the highest branches. And then Colt had leaned down from his saddle, his handsome face twisted into something ugly, and said the words that made Grace's blood turn colder than the lake water ever could. Mother Agnes sends her regards. She said you've been asking too many questions about your daddy's money. Maybe you'll freeze out here and save everyone the trouble. That was when Grace understood. This was not just cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was a message. This was punishment. This was what happened to fat girls who asked questions they had no business asking. Grace was 18 years old when she entered St. Mary's Convent in the Montana Territory. She was 29 now. She had spent 11 years believing she was nothing, believing she was a burden, believing that her body was evidence of sin, and her very existence was an embarrassment to God. Mother Superior Agnes Hartwell had made sure of that. Every morning, Grace woke to the sound of Mother Agnes's voice during meditation, reminding the sisters that gluttony was a deadly sin. Every meal was eaten under watchful eyes. Every extra pound was noted and commented upon. Grace had tried, Lord, how she had tried, to make herself smaller, to eat less, to be less. But her body refused to cooperate. At 340 pounds, she was the largest woman in the convent by 100 pounds, and Mother Agnes never let her forget it. God does not accept gluttons as his brides, Mother Agnes had said when Grace asked about taking her final vows 5 years ago. You are a postulant, Sister Grace, and you will remain one until you learn discipline. 5 years Grace had been a postulant. 5 years of being almost but not quite a real nun. 5 years of being told she was too fat to be holy, and now she was going to die in this lake because she had made the mistake of asking about her father's will. The thought came to Grace suddenly, quietly, like a whisper from somewhere deep inside her soul. She could just let go. She could stop treading water, stop fighting the cold, stop trying to be something the world clearly did not want her to be. She could slip under the surface and let the lake take her, and maybe, just maybe, God would accept her in death, since he had not seemed to want her in life. Grace took a breath, preparing to do exactly that, when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Heavy, steady, purposeful. Not the chaotic gallop of drunk young men, but the measured pace of someone who knew these mountains, who belonged here. Grace's heart stuttered in her chest. If it was Colt and his friends coming back, if they had decided that humiliation was not enough, if they wanted to do worse things and laugh at her, then she would rather drown than face them again. But the rider who emerged from the tree line was not Colt Brennan. Grace had lived in Montana Territory for 11 years, and she had never seen a man like this. He was enormous, easily 6'9", broad across the shoulders in a way that made him look like he had been carved from the mountain itself. He wore buckskins, dark with age and use, and his hair was long and black, shot through with silver at the temples, hanging loose past his shoulders. His beard was thick and untamed, covering the lower half of his face, and a scar ran from his hairline down across his right cheek, disappearing into the beard. He sat on a massive Appaloosa horse, and even from a distance, Grace could see the knife at his belt, the rifle across his saddle, the coiled rope hanging from his saddle horn. This was not a man from town. This was not a man who followed anyone's rules but his own. This was the mountain man they whispered about in Stillwater, the half-Cherokee, half-Scottish hermit who lived somewhere up in the high peaks and came down twice a year to trade furs and buy supplies. Grace had heard the stories. They said he had killed a dozen men. They said he could track anything that walked or crawled. They said he had turned his back on and civilization both, and that the wilderness had claimed him as its own. They said his name was Elijah Blackwood, though most people just called him Eli, and he was looking right at her. Grace's first instinct was to sink lower in the water, to hide herself, to disappear. But she was already up to her chin, and if she went any lower, she would be underwater entirely. So she froze, her arms locked around her chest, her eyes wide with terror. And then Eli did something that Grace would remember for the rest of her life. He turned his back. Not slowly, not reluctantly, but immediately and completely. One moment he was looking in her direction, the next he had swung his horse around so that he faced the tree line, his back to the lake. And then he spoke, his voice low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. "Sister, you hurt?" Grace could not speak. Her throat was too tight, her teeth chattering too hard. She managed a sound that might have been a no. "Those boys touch you?" Eli's voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was something underneath it now, something cold and dangerous. "No," Grace managed to get out. They took my clothes?" Silence. The wind moved through the pines. Eli's horse shifted its weight, but he did not move, did not turn around. "I ain't gonna look," Eli said. "You got my word on that. Cherokee honor. You understand?" Grace did not understand anything except that this man, this dangerous man, was offering her something no one else had in years, respect. "I understand," she whispered. "My cabin's 2 hours uphill," Eli continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "I'll ride there. Bring clothes, bring blankets, come back for you. Can you stay in the water that long? It's warmer than the air this time of night." Grace's voice broke. Why would you help me?" Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because 15 years ago, I couldn't help someone who needed it. I won't make that mistake twice." Before Grace could ask what he meant, Eli touched his heels to his horse's flanks and rode off into the trees, moving fast but not reckless. A man who knew every inch of this mountain. Grace watched him go, watched until the last glimpse of horse and rider disappeared into the shadows. And then she was alone again with the cold and the dying light and the terrible choice she had almost made. She stayed in the water because Eli had told her to. She stayed because he had said he would come back. She stayed because, for the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had seen her and not looked away in disgust. The sun set, the temperature dropped. Grace's body began to shake so hard she thought her bones might break. She counted seconds, then minutes, then lost track entirely. Time became meaningless. There was only the cold in the dark and the increasingly desperate hope that Eli had meant what he said. And then, just when Grace thought she might actually die out here, just when hypothermia began to feel like a warm blanket instead of a death sentence, she heard the hoofbeats again. Eli rode out of the darkness like something from an old story, like a ghost or a guardian angel or something in between. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, moving with surprising grace for such a large man, and he walked to the edge of the lake, carrying a bundle in his arms. He set it down on a flat rock, then walked backward, counting his steps out loud, until he was a full 40 paces away. Then he sat down on the ground, his back to the lake, and called out, "There's clothes on the rock, sister. Men's clothes, but they're clean and warm. Take your time. I ain't going nowhere, and I ain't looking." Grace's hands were so numb she could barely feel them. It took 3 tries to pull herself out of the water, and when she finally managed it, she collapsed on the rocky shore, gasping, her entire body convulsing with shivers. For a moment, she could not move, could not do anything except lie there and try to remember how to breathe. But Eli's voice cut through the haze. "Sister, you gotta move. You gotta get those clothes on. You hear me?" Grace heard him. She crawled to the rock, each movement in agony, and found the bundle he had left. A flannel shirt, so large it could have fit 3 of her. Wool pants with a rope belt, thick socks, moccasins that looked handmade, and a heavy coat made of bear fur, lined with something soft. She had never worn men's clothing in her life. The vow of modesty she had taken, even as an unofficial postulant, forbade it. But modesty seemed like a luxury she could not afford right now. So Grace pulled on the clothes with shaking hands, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, cinching the belt as tight as it would go. Everything was too big, but it was warm and it was dry, and for the first time in hours, Grace felt like she might actually survive this night. "I'm dressed," she called out, her voice hoarse. Eli stood and turned around. He looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the moonlight, and then he walked toward her. Grace tensed, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to protect herself. But Eli stopped a respectful distance away and simply said, "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Can you ride?" Grace hesitated. "I've never ridden a horse before." Eli nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Then I'll ride behind you. Keep you steady and keep you warm. That all right with you?" No one had asked Grace's permission for anything in 11 years. "Yes," she said. Eli led his horse over, the massive Appaloosa with kind eyes and a patient temperament. He lifted Grace onto the saddle with no more effort than if she had been a child, his hands careful and impersonal, and then he swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, not possessive, not threatening, just anchoring her against the cold. Grace stiffened at first, unused to being touched, unused to being close to anyone, but Eli's body was warm and solid behind her, and slowly, she let herself relax. They rode through the darkness in silence. The moon rose, painting the trees silver. An owl called somewhere in the distance. Grace's shivers began to ease as warmth seeped back into her body, and for the first time since Colt Brennan had thrown her habit into that tree, she felt something other than fear. She felt safe. Halfway through the ride, Grace found her voice again. "They said you were Cherokee." "Half," Eli said from behind her. "Mother was Cherokee. Father was a Scottish trapper who came west looking for beaver and found love instead." "Where are they now?" Silence. Then quietly, "Dead, both of them, long time ago." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Death comes for everyone. Question is what you do with the life you got before it comes." Grace thought about that. She thought about the years she had spent behind convent walls, convinced she was too sinful to deserve anything better. She thought about the lake in the moment when she had been ready to let go. "I almost died tonight," she said. "Not from the cold. Before you came, I was going to let myself sink." Eli's arm tightened around her, just slightly. "But you didn't." "No, I heard your horse. Then I'm glad I came when I did." They rode on. Grace gathered her courage. "Why did you turn your back when you first saw me?" "Because you're a woman in distress, not a spectacle. And because, oh," Eli paused, choosing his words, "because 15 years ago, my wife drowned herself in a river because she couldn't stand the way people looked at her anymore. And I wasn't there to turn my back for her then, to give her dignity when she needed it most." Grace twisted in the saddle to look at him, shocked. In the moonlight, Eli's face was hard and weathered, but his eyes held a pain so deep it made her chest ache. "Your wife killed herself?" "After our daughter died, after the army forced my mother's people onto a reservation and she lost everyone she'd ever known. After this town, this whole damn territory, ground her down until there was nothing left but shame. Yeah, she killed herself. And I've spent 15 years wondering if I could have stopped it if I'd just fought harder, loved louder, made her believe she was worth more than what they said she was." "What was her name?" "Margaret, but everyone called her Maggie. She was beautiful and kind, and she believed the lies people told about her, that she was too soft, too weak, too Much and not enough, all at the same time. Grace understood that feeling with a clarity that hurt. "I'm sorry," she said again. "So am I," Eli said. "But I learned something from losing her. I learned that sometimes keeping your word, showing respect, turning your back when it matters, sometimes that's the difference between life and death. And I swore if I ever got another chance to do right by someone, I wouldn't fail again." "Is that why you helped me? Because of her?" "Partly, but also because you're a human being who needed help. Shouldn't be more complicated than that." They crested a rise and Eli's cabin came into view. It was larger than Grace had expected. A sturdy two-story log structure with smoke curling from the stone chimney and a well-kept garden visible even in the moonlight. Lamplight glowed in the windows. It looked warm. It looked like home. "We're here," Eli said. He dismounted first, then helped Grace down, his hands steady and sure. "Can you stand?" Grace tested her legs. They shook, but they held. "I think so." "Good. Let's get you inside and warm." The interior of the cabin was a revelation. Grace had expected something rough, maybe even primitive, but what she found was a space that was clean and organized and surprisingly civilized. Bookshelves lined one wall, packed with volumes on everything from law to medicine to Cherokee history. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a fire already burning low. Handmade furniture, simple but well-crafted, was arranged with care. Herbs hung drying from the rafters. A rifle and several knives were mounted on one wall, but they were clearly tools, not decorations. This was the home of a man who had chosen solitude, but who had not given up on being human. "Sit," Eli said, guiding Grace to a chair near the fire. "I'll make tea." Grace sat, watching as Eli moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency. He built up the fire, filled a kettle from a water barrel, hung it over the flames. He pulled dried herbs from the rafters and crushed them between his fingers, dropping them into a clay pot. His movements were economical, practiced, the movements of a man who had been taking care of himself for a long time. When the tea was ready, he poured it into a wooden cup and handed it to Grace, then retreated to the far side of the room to pour his own. He did not hover. He did not watch her drink. He simply gave her space and warmth and time. Grace wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her frozen fingers. The tea tasted of mint and something else, something earthy and slightly bitter, but it was hot and it was good. She drank slowly, feeling warmth spread through her chest and belly, feeling her body begin to thaw from the inside out. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome. I don't I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." "You'd have died," Eli said bluntly. "Hypothermia would have taken you in another hour, maybe less." "I know." Grace stared into her tea. Part of me wanted it to." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The wanting to die part or the being taken part?" "Both, I think." "Wait, bye." Grace laughed, but it was a broken sound. "Because I'm fat, because I'm worthless, because God doesn't want me and neither does anyone else." "That's a lie." The certainty in Eli's voice made Grace look up. Mother Agnes says, "Mother Agnes is a liar and a bully," Eli interrupted, "and she's using God as a weapon to control you. But God, the real God, the one who made mountains and rivers and every living thing, that God doesn't care about pounds, that God cares about hearts. And sister, I don't know you well, but I know you got a good heart. I can see it." "How can you see that?" "Because you asked why I'd help you instead of just accepting it. Because you said thank you. Because even half frozen and scared out of your mind, you were worried about breaking vows by wearing men's clothes. Those aren't the actions of a worthless person. Those are the actions of someone who cares about doing right." Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks. She had not cried in the lake, but she cried now, in this warm cabin, with this strange man who saw something in her that she could not see in herself. "I don't know how to be anything other than ashamed," she whispered. "Then maybe it's time to learn," Eli said gently. He stood and moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out blankets and what looked like a nightshirt. He set them on a small table near Grace. "You'll take the bedroom upstairs. It's warm and the bed's comfortable. I'll sleep down here by the fire. I can't take your bed." You can and you will. You need rest. Real rest. And tomorrow, we're going into town. Grace's heart lurched. Town? But I can't. They'll see me like this. They'll, they'll see you with me, Eli said firmly. And they'll know that anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me first. We're going to the marshal. We're reporting what those boys did. And then, he paused. Then we're going to have a conversation with Mother Agnes about your father's will. Grace stared at him. My father's will? But he died in debt. Mother Agnes said, Mother Agnes said a lot of things, I suspect. Question is whether any of them are true. I don't understand. Your last name is Morrison, right? Yes. Judge Morrison's daughter from Boston? You knew my father? Knew of him. He was a good man, from what I heard. Died about 10 years back, left his daughter a substantial inheritance. Land in Montana, money and trust with the church. Grace felt the room spin. No, that's not. Mother Agnes said there was nothing. She said father died owing money to bad men. That's why I came here to the convent, to escape them. Eli's expression was grim. Sister Grace, I think you need to consider the possibility that you've been lied to for a very long time. The words hung in the air like smoke. Grace tried to process them, tried to make sense of what Eli was saying, but her mind felt sluggish, overwhelmed. She had been so cold for so long, and now she was warm, and the warmth was making her realize just how exhausted she was. I can't think, she said. I can't. It's too much. Then don't think tonight, Eli said. Sleep. Tomorrow when you're rested, we'll figure it out together. But right now, you need to rest. He was right. Grace could barely keep her eyes open. She stood on shaking legs and Eli guided her to the stairs, keeping a respectful distance but staying close enough to catch her if she fell. At the top of the stairs, he pointed to a door. That's the bedroom. There's a basin and water if you want to wash up. Clean nightshirt on the bed. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. Will you be here in the morning? I'll be here, Eli promised. I'll be right downstairs. You're safe, Sister Grace. I give you my word. And somehow, impossibly, Grace believed him. She went into the bedroom and found exactly what he had promised. A simple room but clean and warm, with a real bed covered in quilts. A basin of water that was still warm from being near the fire. A nightshirt that was far too large but smelled of wood smoke and pine. She washed as best she could, changed into the nightshirt, and crawled into the bed. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the sound of Eli adding logs to the fire downstairs, and the quiet murmur of his voice as he spoke to his horse outside. He was saying something in Cherokee, words she could not understand, but the tone was gentle and sad. He was mourning, she realized. Still mourning after 15 years. Still carrying the weight of the woman he could not save. Grace closed her eyes and let sleep claim her, and for the first time in 11 years, she did not dream of hell. She dreamed of mountains. Grace woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke and something cooking that made her stomach clench with hunger. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The bed was too shiny, the quilts too warm, the light coming through the window too golden and peaceful. Then memory flooded back. The lake, the cold, Colt Brennan's cruel laughter, and Eli, the mountain man who had turned his back to give her dignity when no one else would. She sat up slowly, her body aching in places she had not known could ache. Her muscles were sore from the cold, her throat raw from the water she had swallowed, her hands still tender where the rough bark had scraped them as she tried to climb the tree to reach her habit. But she was alive. Against all odds and despite her own despair, she was alive. The nightshirt Eli had given her hung almost to her ankles. She found her borrowed clothes from the night before folded neatly on a chair, clean and drawn. Someone, Eli she assumed, must have washed them while she slept. The gesture was so thoughtful, so unexpected, that it brought tears to her eyes. Grace dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with the unfamiliar fastenings of men's clothing. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the wash basin, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Without her coif and habit, with her hair loose and tangled around her shoulders, wearing oversized buckskins and moccasins, she looked nothing like Sister Grace Morrison. She looked like someone else entirely. Someone wilder, someone freer. someone who might actually deserve to be saved. She made her way downstairs carefully, her legs still unsteady. Eli was at the stove, his back to her, stirring something in a large iron pot. He had his hair tied back today, revealing the full extent of the scar that ran down his face. In the morning light, Grace could see that he was older than she had first thought, probably in his early 40s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. "Morning then," he said without turning around. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Grace admitted. "How did you know I was awake?" Floorboards creak different when someone is walking on them than when a house is settling. Eli glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time Grace saw him smile. It was a small smile, barely there, but it transformed his face. "Also, you breathe different when you're nervous. You breathing nervous right now, sister?" "A little," Grace said honestly. "Don't be. Sit, eat, then we'll talk about what comes next." The breakfast Eli set before her was simple but substantial. Venison stew left over from the night before, warm cornbread with butter, coffee so strong it made her eyes water. They ate in the same comfortable rhythm as the night before. Eli gave her space, never watching, never judging. Just two people sharing a meal. It was becoming familiar now, this quiet respect. Grace found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't thought possible. When they were finished, Eli collected the bowls and washed them in a basin, then turned to face her properly. "We need to talk about your father," he said, "and about Mother Agnes, and about what those boys did to you yesterday. But before we do, I need to know something. Are you ready to hear things that might hurt?" Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I need to know the truth." Eli nodded. He pulled a chair over and sat down, keeping a respectful distance but close enough that Grace could see his eyes, could read the honesty there. 10 years ago, Judge James Morrison died in Boston. Heart attack, the papers said. He left behind a daughter, Grace, who was 18 at the time. He also left behind a will that was filed with the territorial courthouse here in Montana. I know this because 2 years ago, I was in town buying supplies and I heard a couple of lawyers arguing about it in the saloon. They were saying it was a shame that the Morrison girl had never claimed her inheritance, that Mother Agnes was sitting on prime land that could be worth a fortune if the railroad came through. Grace's hands began to shake. Inheritance? But Mother Agnes told me Father died owing money. She said creditors would have taken everything, that I was only safe because I entered the convent. That was a lie, Eli said flatly. Your father left you 240 acres of land at the base of Blackstone Ridge. He also left $12,000 in Weissmuth, held in trust by the church until you turned 21 or left the convent, whichever came first. The room tilted. Grace gripped the arms of her chair, trying to breathe, trying to understand. 240 acres, she whispered. $12,000. You turned 21 8 years ago, Eli continued. That money should have been transferred to you then. The land should have been deeded in your name. But Mother Agnes, as your trustee, would have had to authorize that transfer. And from what I heard in that saloon, she never did. She stole from me. Grace's voice was hollow. For 8 years, she's been stealing from me. More than that, Eli said grimly, she's been lying to you, controlling you, using your guilt and your faith and your fear to keep you trapped. Because as long as you thought you had nothing, as long as you believed you were worthless and dependent on her charity, you'd never ask questions. You'd never leave. And she could keep that land and that money for herself. Grace thought of all the times Mother Agnes had denied her request to take final vows. All the times she had been told she was too gluttonous, too undisciplined, too fat to be a true bride of Christ. She had thought it was about holiness, about her unworthiness in the eyes of God. But it had never been about God at all. It had been about money. The land at Blackstone Ridge, Grace said slowly, her mind starting to work through the implications. Where exactly is it? About 5 miles west of here, up in the foothills. Good timberland, freshwater springs, and a plateau that's perfect for building. But more than that, it's right in the path of where the Northern Pacific Railroad wants to lay track. If that railroad comes through, and all signs say it will within the next 2 years, that land will be worth 10 times what it is now, maybe more. And Mother Agnes knows this. Everyone knows it. The railroads have been surveying through here for months. Your land, Grace, it's not just valuable. It's the key piece. The railroad needs it for the route to make sense. Without it, they'd have to go 20 miles north through rough country, add months to the construction, millions to the cost. Whoever owns that land has leverage. Real leverage. Grace felt something shifting inside her. Something hard and cold settling where fear and shame had lived for so long. Mother Agnes doesn't own it. I do. That's right. And she's been keeping me ignorant and afraid so I wouldn't know. So I wouldn't claim what's mine. That's right. Grace stood up, her legs steady now. I need to see the will. I need to see proof. Then we'll go to the courthouse today, Eli said. Marshal Grady is a fair man. He'll make sure you get access to those records. But first, we need to report what happened to you yesterday. Assault, theft, attempted murder. Those boys can't get away with what they did. Mother Agnes will say I'm lying, Grace said. She'll say I'm unstable, that my weight has affected my mind. She said it before. Ika then will prove she's wrong, Eli said. He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a leather satchel. From inside, he drew out a piece of torn black fabric. I found this snagged on a branch near the lake. It's from your habit, isn't it? Grace reached out with trembling fingers and touched the fabric. It was indeed from her habit, torn from the hem when Colt had thrown it into the tree. How did you find this? I went back last night after you fell asleep, tracked the whole scene, found horse tracks, found where they built a fire and drank, found the exact tree where they threw your clothes. I can show the marshal all of it, and I can identify the horses. Colt Brennan rides a distinctive Palomino with a white blaze. Jake Riley's horse has a crooked shoe on the left front hoof. I can prove they were there. You did all that for me? Grace felt tears burning behind her eyes. Wait so. Because it's the right thing to do, Eli said simply. And because nobody else was going to do it. He paused, then added more quietly, and because when my wife needed someone to fight for her, I didn't do it. I let the town grind her down. Let the whispers and the cruelty break her piece by piece. I told myself I was being civilized, that I should let her handle it her way, that eventually people would see her worth, but they didn't, and she died thinking she wasn't worth fighting for. I won't make that mistake again. Grace looked at this man, this stranger who had become her unexpected champion, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become trust. Tell me about her, Grace said. About your wife, if it's not too painful. Eli was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old grief. My mother's name was Morning Star. She was Cherokee, from a village near Fort Blackstone. Beautiful and strong and wise in the ways of the mountain. My father, Duncan Blackwood, came west from Scotland looking for beaver pelts and found her instead. They married in the Cherokee way, lived in harmony with her people for 20 years. I was their only child. He took a breath, the words coming harder now. In 1873, the Army came. Said the Cherokee had to move to the reservation in Oklahoma. Trail of Tears, they called it, like giving suffering a pretty name makes it hurt less. I was working as a scout for the Army then, tracking outlaws and hostiles. I thought I was doing good work, keeping people safe. But that day my commander gave me orders, said I had to help move the Cherokee out, including my mother's village. I refused, got court-martialed, lost my commission, but I didn't care. I went to warn my mother, to get her somewhere safe. His hands clenched into fists. I was too late. They had already started the march. It was November, cold and wet. The Army didn't give them time to prepare, didn't give them warm clothes or enough food. People started dying within the first week. My mother lasted 2 months before fever took her. I found her grave marker along the trail, just a stick in the ground with her name carved in it. Oh, Eli, Grace whispered. But she wasn't alone when she died, Eli continued. My little sister, little Dove, she was 8 years old. She stayed with our mother until the end. Then she died too, 3 days later. Starvation. I found that out later from a survivor. An 8-year-old girl starved to death because the United States Army couldn't be bothered to feed the people they were forcing off their land. Tears streamed down Grace's face. And you've carried that grief for 15 years. I lost everything that mattered. My mother, my sister, my faith in the country I'd served, my belief that there was any justice in this world. So I came up here to the mountain. Would have died that first winter if not for Red Sky Walker, a Cherokee elder who survived the march. He found me half frozen, brought me back to life, taught me how to live with grief instead of drowning in it. He checks on me sometimes, makes sure I haven't given up entirely. But you came down yesterday, Grace said. You saved me. Because I heard you scream, Eli said. And for just a second, I thought it was Little Dove. Thought maybe somehow I'd gotten a second chance, that I could save her this time. But when I got there and saw you, saw what those boys had done, I realized it didn't matter that you weren't my sister. You were someone's daughter, someone's sister maybe. You were a person who needed help, and this time, I wasn't going to fail. Grace crossed the room and did something she had not done with another human being in more than a decade. She reached out and took Eli's hand. His skin was rough, scarred, warm. He looked down at their joined hands in surprise. You didn't fail, Grace said firmly. You saved me, and now you're helping me fight for what's mine. That's not failure, that's heroism. I'm no hero, Eli said, but he didn't pull his hand away. Maybe not, Grace said, but you're a good man, and that's rarer than you think. An hour later, they were riding into Stillwater together, Grace seated in front of Eli on his massive Appaloosa. The town was bigger than Grace remembered, or maybe she had just gotten used to seeing nothing but convent walls and the surrounding forest. There were perhaps 400 souls living here, with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, a courthouse, and a handful of other businesses. People stopped and stared as they rode past. Grace heard the whispers, saw the pointing fingers. That's the mountain man, someone said. Ain't seen him in town for near 6 months. Who's that with him? Is that Sister Grace? Can't be. Sister Grace wouldn't be dressed like that. Wouldn't be riding with a man. It is her. Lord have mercy, what's happened? The whispers grew louder as they dismounted in front of the marshal's office. Grace felt the weight of every eye, felt the judgment in every stare. But Eli simply offered her his arm, steady and solid, and together they walked through the door. Marshal Thomas Grady looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing into a frown. He was a man in his mid-50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and the bearing of someone who had seen too much violence in his life to be impressed by much of anything. But his eyes were sharp and assessing, and when he saw Grace's borrowed clothes and Eli's protective stance, those eyes narrowed. Eli, he said, been a while, and Sister Grace, unless I'm much mistaken, what brings you two to my office at this hour? Crime, Eli said bluntly. Multiple crimes, assault, theft, and attempted murder. Grady sat up straighter. That's serious accusations. Sit down, both of you, and tell me what happened. Grace told the story haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as Eli's presence beside her gave her strength. She told about going to Crystal Lake to bathe, about Colt Brennan and his friends finding her there, about the things they said and did. She told about the cold water, about being stranded for hours, about deciding to let herself die. And she told about Eli finding her, saving her, bringing her to his cabin. Marshal Grady listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When Grace finished, he turned to Eli. You got evidence to back this up? Eli produced the torn fabric, then described in detail what he had found at the lake. He spoke like a man giving testimony in court, precise and factual, and Grace realized with a start that he must have done this before. Marshal Grady seemed to realize it too. You track like an army scout, Grady observed. Used to be one, Eli said shortly. Long time ago, before I learned better. Why'd you quit? Because the army gave me orders I couldn't follow. Eli's voice was flat, emotionless, but Grace could feel the pain beneath it. Orders that got innocent people killed. Cherokee people. My people. Grady studied him for a long moment, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. You talking about the 1873 removal? I am. Lost family in that? My mother and sister. I'm sorry, Grady said, and he sounded like he meant it. That was a dark business. A lot of good men left the service over it. He turned his attention back to the matter at hand. I'll bring the Brennan boy and his friends in for questioning, but I gotta warn you, Sister Grace, this won't be easy. The Brennans are the richest family in 3 territories. Garrett Brennan owns half the land between here and Denver. He's got lawyers and influence and more money than God. His boy might be a vicious little bastard, pardon my language, but Garrett will protect him. I don't care how much money they have, Grace said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. What they did was wrong. They nearly killed me, and they said, she swallowed hard, they said Mother Agnes sent them. The marshal's eyebrows shot up. Mother Superior Agnes, from St. Mary's Convent? Yes. Colt said she sent her regards, that I'd been asking too many questions about my father's money. Now that, Grady said slowly, is a different kettle of fish entirely, because that's not the first time I've heard rumors about Mother Agnes and money that don't quite add up. He stood and reached for his hat. I think maybe we should all take a walk over to the courthouse, see what we can find in the public records about Judge Morrison's estate. The courthouse was a squat brick building 2 doors down from the marshal's office. Inside, a clerk who looked barely old enough to shave sat behind a desk piled high with ledgers and loose papers. He jumped to his feet when Marshal Grady entered, his eyes widening at the sight of the lawman's serious expression. Marshal, sir, what can I do for you? Need to see the probate records for Judge James Morrison. Died 1878 in Boston, estate filed here in Montana Territory. The clerk's face went pale. Marshal, those records are sealed by order of Mother Superior Agnes Hartwell. Sealed? Grady's voice went dangerously quiet. On what authority? She said they contained private church business and shouldn't be available for public inspection. Said it was to protect the privacy of Judge Morrison's surviving family. The hell she did, Grady said. Boy, I don't care what Mother Agnes said. Probate records are public by law unless there's a court order sealing them. You got a court order? No, sir. Just Mother Agnes's request, and Judge Wheeler said, Judge Wheeler ain't got no jurisdiction over probate records unless someone files a motion. Get me that file. Now. The clerk scurried into a back room. While they waited, Grace became aware of a commotion outside. Voices raised in anger, the sound of horses and heavy boots on wooden sidewalks. Then the door burst open and Mother Agnes herself swept in, her black habit swirling around her like storm clouds. Behind her came Deacon William Thatcher, tall and thin and cold-eyed, his face pale and pinched with what looked like perpetual disapproval. Marshal Grady, Mother Agnes said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. What is the meaning of this? I received word that you were demanding sealed church documents. You have no right to interfere in church business. Not demanding, Mother Agnes, requesting public records that never should have been sealed in the first place. Those records contain sensitive information about one of our sisters. They are protected by religious privilege and the sanctity of the confessional. That sister is standing right here, Grady said, gesturing to Grace, and she has every right to see her own father's will. Ain't no confessional privilege that supersedes a person's right to their own property records. Mother Agnes's gaze swung to Grace, and in that moment, Grace saw something in the older woman's eyes that she had never seen before. Not disappointment or stern correction, but fear. Raw, desperate fear. Grace, Mother Agnes said, her voice dropping into a tone of false sweetness that made Grace's skin crawl. My dear child, what are you doing here? And why are you dressed in that inappropriate and scandalous manner? Have you taken leave of your senses? I'm here to learn the truth, Grace said. Her voice shook, but she kept her chin up, kept her eyes locked on the woman who had controlled her for 11 years. About my father, about the inheritance you stole from me. Stole? Mother Agnes gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in theatrical shock. How dare you accuse me of theft? I have devoted years to your care, taken you in when you had nothing, fed and clothed, and educated you out of the goodness of my heart and the charity of the church. You told me I had nothing, Grace interrupted, and the strength in her own voice surprised her. You told me my father died in debt, that creditors would have taken everything, that I was only safe because I entered the convent. But that was a lie, wasn't it? Your father did die in debt, Mother Agnes snapped, her sweet tone evaporating. The inheritance barely covered his obligations. The land is worthless scrub, the money long gone to creditors. Then you shouldn't have any objection to showing us the probate records, Marshal Grady said mildly. Should be simple enough to prove your story if it's true. The clerk emerged from the back room carrying a dusty leather folder tied with faded ribbon. Found it, Marshal. Morrison Estate, filed June 1878. He set it on the counter with a thump that sent dust motes dancing in the sunlight, streaming through the window. Grady untied the ribbon and opened the folder. Grace moved closer, Eli a solid presence at her back, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Together they read the document that would change everything. Last Will and Testament of James Arthur Morrison. It began in formal legal language. Being of sound mind and body, I hereby bequeath to my beloved daughter, Grace Elizabeth Morrison, the following assets: 240 acres of land at Blackstone Ridge, Montana Territory, surveyed and deeded in her name, said land comprising timber, water rights, and mineral rights in perpetuity. $12,000 in United States currency to be held in trust by the Church of St. Mary until such as Grace reaches her majority at age 21 or voluntarily departs from religious life, whichever comes first. Trustee of said funds to be Mother Superior Agnes Hartwell, with the understanding that said funds are to be transferred to Grace immediately upon her 21st birthday, and that said trustee has no authority to use said funds for any purpose other than Grace's direct benefit. The words blurred in front of Grace's eyes. She had to read them twice, 3 times before they made sense, before the full weight of the betrayal settled into her bones. I was 21 8 years ago, she whispered. Yes, Marshal Grady said grimly. You were. And I never received any transfer of funds. I didn't even know the money existed. I didn't know about the land. No, Grady agreed, you didn't. He turned to Mother Agnes, whose face had gone from pale to ashen, a sickly gray color that made her look suddenly old and frail. Mother Superior, you want to explain to me why you never transferred these funds to Miss Morrison on her 21st birthday, as the will clearly states you were required to do? There were expenses, Mother Agnes stammered, her composure cracking. The orphanage needed repairs. The roof was leaking. The children needed food and clothing and medicine. I used the funds for God's work, as any good steward would. Every penny went to feed hungry children and keep them warm. Surely you cannot fault me for that. That ain't your decision to make, Grady said, his voice hard. Those funds were held in trust for a specific person with specific terms. Using them for any other purpose, no matter how noble sounding, is theft. Plain and simple. I disagree with your interpretation, Marshal, Deacon Thatcher spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and cold as river ice. The church has broad discretion in managing trust funds when those funds are held for religious purposes. Mother Agnes acted well within her authority as both trustee and spiritual guardian of Miss Morrison. And who might you be? Grady asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Deacon William Thatcher, spiritual advisor to St. Mary's Convent and surrounding parishes. Any relation to Garrett Brennan? A pause so brief Grace almost missed it, but it was there, a flicker of something in Thatcher's cold eyes. He's my brother, yes, though I fail to see how that's relevant to this matter. That so? Grady's expression was unreadable, the face of a man who had played poker with better liars than this. So the brother of the richest man in the territory, the man who's been trying to buy up every piece of land within 50 miles for his railroad investments, just happens to be the spiritual advisor to the woman who's been sitting on $250,000 worth of land that belongs to someone else. Land that his brother desperately wants. That strike, anyone else, is mighty convenient? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Grace looked from Mother Agnes to Deacon Thatcher and saw the truth written on both their faces, clear as scripture. This had never been about God or salvation or even cruelty for cruelty's sake. This had always been about money, about land, about power and greed dressed up in holy robes. The land at Blackstone Ridge, Grace said slowly, working it out as she spoke, her mind finally free to think clearly without the constant weight of shame and self-doubt. The railroad wants to come through there, doesn't it? The Northern Pacific line that everyone's been talking about. And Garrett Brennan wants to buy it from me, but he can't, because I don't even know I own it. So he and Mother Agnes made a deal. She keeps me ignorant and afraid, maybe even keeps me thinking I'm too fat and sinful to deserve anything good. And in exchange, when the railroad finally comes through and the land value skyrockets, Mother Agnes sells it to Garrett Brennan at a fraction of its worth, Eli finished, his voice carrying an edge of disgust. Then they split the profit. Church gets a new wing on the orphanage, Brennan gets his railroad right of way, and Grace stays none the wiser, thinking she's a worthless burden living on charity. That's slander, Thatcher said sharply. You have no proof of any such arrangement. Don't need proof of intent when the crime itself is clear, Grady said. Mother Agnes violated the terms of the trust. That's theft, regardless of what her plans were for the money. Very good, child, Deacon Thatcher said to Grace, and there was nothing warm in his smile, nothing holy. You're smarter than we gave you credit for. Sharper than your mother ever was. My mother? Grace frowned, confused by the sudden change of subject. My mother died when I was 6 years old. Not your birth mother, your stepmother, Patricia Morrison, formerly Patricia Kemp, before she married your father in 1875. The world tilted sideways. Grace grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. I don't have a stepmother. My father never remarried after my mother died. He told me that himself many times. He said he could never love any piece the way he loved her. Didn't he? Thatcher pulled a folded document from inside his coat with the air of a magician revealing his final trick. I have here a marriage certificate, dated March 1875, between James Morrison of Boston and Patricia Kemp of New York. Witnessed and sealed, 3 years before his death. That's impossible, Grace said. But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Her father had traveled frequently for his work. There had been months at a time when she barely saw him. Could he have had a whole other life she knew nothing about? I would have known. Father would have told me. He wouldn't have kept something like that secret. Wouldn't he? Thatcher's smile grew wider, crueler. Your father kept many secrets, it seems, including the existence of a second daughter, a child from his second marriage, a girl named Sarah, half-sister to you, Miss Morrison, 11 years old when your father died, which would make her, let me see, 21 now. Almost the same age you were when you should have received your inheritance. Grace's knees buckled. Only Eli's quick reflexes kept her from hitting the floor. His arm came around her waist, strong and sure, holding her up when she could not hold herself. I have a sister? Her voice was barely a whisper, raw with shock and disbelief. A half-sister? Had, Thatcher corrected, and there was something almost gleeful in his precision. Patricia brought the girl to us 2 years after your father died, said the child was wild and unmanageable, needed the firm hand of the church to civilize her. We took her in as an act of Christian charity. Sarah Morrison lived at St. Mary's for 3 years before we were able to place her in a good position. What kind of position? Eli asked, his voice deadly quiet. A textile mill in Philadelphia. Good, honest work, character building, far better than she would have had living on the streets. You sent an 11-year-old girl to work in a factory? Grace could barely form the words. An 11-year-old child? We provided opportunities for children who had none, Mother Agnes said, but her voice wavered, lacking its usual authority. It's not our fault if some could not handle the rigors of honest labor. How many? Grace asked. She pulled away from Eli, standing on her own now, fury burning away her shock and steadying her shaking legs. How many children have you sent away? How many have you sold? We don't sell children, Mother Agnes snapped, her mask of benevolence finally cracking completely. We place them in positions where they can be useful members of society instead of being burdens on charity and the goodwill of others. We give them skills, teach them the value of work, make them productive instead of parasitic. How many? Grace repeated, louder this time, her voice ringing with an authority she had never known she possessed. Mother Agnes's face hardened into something ugly, All pretense of kindness gone. 17 children over the past 10 years, and they should all be grateful for the opportunities we gave them. Ungrateful as most of them were. The marshal's hand moved to the gun at his hip. Mother Agnes Hartwell, Deacon William Thatcher, I'm placing you both under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, in trafficking, in human persons. You have the right to. You can't arrest us, Thatcher interrupted, drawing himself up to his full height. We're ordained members of the clergy. We're protected by religious law and the separation of church and state. You have no jurisdiction over us. Religious law don't trump civil law, Grady said, his hand steady on his weapon. And trafficking in children, selling them to factories and God knows what else, that ain't protected by any law, earthly or divine. Now you can come quiet, or I can drag you out in chains and let the whole town watch. Your choice. What happened next was chaos. Deacon Thatcher lunged for the door, moving with surprising speed for a man of his age and build. But Eli was faster. He grabbed the deacon by the collar and slammed him against the wall with enough force to rattle the windows and knock loose a small avalanche of papers from a nearby shelf. Mother Agnes screamed and rushed at Grace, her face twisted with rage and hatred, all her pious pretense stripped away to reveal the bitter, greedy woman beneath. You ungrateful wretch, she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. After everything I did for you, I should have let you starve in Boston. I should have turned you away when you came begging for sanctuary. You were nothing but a burden from the day you arrived, eating enough for 3 normal women, taking up space better used for real sisters who actually deserved God's grace. I should have. Grace stepped aside and Mother Agnes stumbled, her momentum carrying her forward. She caught herself on the counter, breathing hard, and for the first time Grace saw her not as a figure of divine authority, but as what she truly was, a bitter, greedy, small woman who had used God's name as a weapon and other people's faith as a tool of control. You should have told me the truth, Grace said quietly, and the calmness in her voice seemed to enrage Mother Agnes more than any shouting could have. That's what you should have done, but you didn't, because the truth would have set me free, and you needed me trapped. I needed you gone, Mother Agnes hissed, and now the truth was pouring out of her like poison from a lanced wound. Your father was a fool who left his fortune to a fat, worthless girl instead of to the church where it could have done some good. That land should be building schools and hospitals, not sitting unused because some gluttonous sinner thinks she deserves what better people worked for. I did what had to be done to correct your father's mistake. Marshal Grady pulled out his handcuffs and secured both prisoners, ignoring their protests and threats. As he led them toward the door, Mother Agnes turned back to Grace one last time, and her face was a mask of pure hatred. You think this is over? She hissed. You think you've won? Garrett Brennan owns this town. He owns the judges, the lawyers, half the territorial government. He'll crush you like the fat little bug you are, and he'll take that land, and there's nothing you or your savage protector can do to stop it. By the time he's done with you, you'll wish you'd drowned in that lake. Maybe, Eli said from where he still stood guard by the door, his massive frame blocking any escape route. But he'll have to go through me first, and I'm a lot harder to crush than you might think. The marshal hauled his prisoners out into the street. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion and the screaming, and the whispers started immediately. Grace stood in the courthouse, shaking, trying to process everything that had just been revealed. Among the crowd, Grace spotted a small Cherokee boy, perhaps 11 years old, watching from beside a wagon. His face was bruised, his clothes torn. She recognized him from the few times she had been allowed to visit the orphanage to help with laundry. Little Bear, they called him. The boy Mother Agnes beat for speaking Cherokee. The boy Deacon Thatcher dragged by the ear through town, calling him a savage. Their eyes met. Little Bear gave her the smallest nod, a gesture of recognition, of solidarity. Then he disappeared back into the crowd. She had land worth a fortune. She had money that had been stolen. She had a half-sister she had never known about, sold into factory labor at 11 years old. And she had enemies with more power and wealth than she could imagine. Enemies who would stop at nothing to take what was hers. Grace, Eli's voice was gentle. He had moved to stand beside her without her noticing, and now his hand rested lightly on her shoulder, warm and steadying. Breathe, just breathe. She breathed, in and out, in and out. The simple act of filling her lungs and emptying them again, the most basic function of life, suddenly felt like a victory. I have a sister, she said. Yeah, you do. And Mother Agnes sold her into slavery when she was just a child. Yeah. I have to find her. I have to bring her home. I have to tell her that someone wants her, that she's not alone. We will, Eli promised, and the certainty in his voice made Grace believe it might actually be possible. But first, we need to deal with Garrett Brennan and his boy, because Mother Agnes was right about one thing. He's not gonna let this go easy. Man, with that much money and that little conscience, he'll come at us hard. As if summoned by the speaking of his name, a rider came galloping into town at a speed that sent dust flying and people scattering out of the way. He pulled up in front of the courthouse and dismounted in a hurry, his horse lathered and blowing, foam dripping from its bit. Grace recognized him as one of Garrett Brennan's ranch hands, a young man named Tommy or Timmy or something like that. Marshal, he shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Marshal Grady, you need to come quick. There's been an attack at St. Mary's. Someone set fire to the orphanage. Grace's heart stopped. The children. 23 children lived in that building. Children as young as 5. Children who depended on the adults around them for protection. Children who had already lost so much. The children, she gasped. Oh God, the children are still there. She was running before anyone could stop her, out the door and down the street toward where she knew St. Mary's stood on the eastern edge of town. Behind her, she heard Eli shouting her name, heard the marshal calling for help in organizing men to fight the fire, but she did not stop. Could not stop, because 23 children were in that building, and if they died because of her, because she had dared to stand up to Mother Agnes and claim what was rightfully hers, she would never forgive herself, would never be able to live with that guilt. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, her borrowed boots pounding the dirt street, her lungs burning, her heavy body moving with desperate purpose. She rounded the corner past the general store and saw it. Black smoke rising against the clear morning sky, flames visible through the windows of the orphanage building. And standing in front of the burning structure, herding children away from the flames, was a small figure that Grace recognized even at a distance. Little Bear, the Cherokee boy she had tried so hard to protect. He was carrying a child in his arms, a little girl no more than 6, and tears streaked through the soot on his face. Grace reached him just as he set the little girl down with the others. Little Bear, are they all out? Is everyone safe? The boy looked up at her, and the grief in his eyes told her everything before he spoke. Sister Mary Catherine, he said, his voice breaking. She went back inside for the baby. She hasn't come out. Grace looked at the burning building, at the flames now engulfing the eastern wing, at the smoke pouring from every window. And then she did not think. She simply moved, running toward the fire, toward the screams she could now hear coming from inside, toward the one nun who had ever shown her genuine kindness. She was going to save Sister Mary Catherine, or die trying. Grace ran toward the flames without thinking, without planning, driven only by the desperate need to save the one person in St. Mary's who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Sister Mary Catherine, who had smuggled her extra bread when Mother Agnes put her on starvation rations. Sister Mary Catherine, who had whispered encouragement when Grace was being publicly humiliated. Sister Mary Catherine, who had looked at her with compassion instead of contempt. She was 10 feet from the door when arms like iron bands wrapped around her waist and lifted her clean off the ground. She struggled, kicking and thrashing, but Eli held her fast, his voice rough in her ear. You can't go in there. The roof's about to collapse. She's in there. Sister Mary Catherine went back for a baby. I have to. You'll die if you go in. The smoke alone will kill you before you reach her. Then let me die, Grace screamed, tears streaming down her face. Let me die trying to save someone instead of drowning in self-pity in a lake. Let me die for something that matters. No. Eli's voice was firm, but she could hear the anguish beneath it. I won't watch another woman I care about die. Not today. Not like this. The words penetrated Grace's panic. Another woman I care about. Before she could process what that meant, a figure emerged from the smoke pouring out the doorway. Sister Mary Catherine staggered forward, her habit burning at the hem, clutching a bundle wrapped in blankets. She made it 5 steps before her legs gave out. Eli released Grace and moved faster than she had ever seen a man his size move. He reached Sister Mary Catherine in 3 strides, swept her and the baby up in his arms, and carried them away from the building. Grace rushed forward to help as he laid them on the ground. Sister Mary Catherine was coughing violently, her face black with soot, but she was alive, and the bundle in her arms was moving, mewling with the distinctive cry of an infant. "The baby!" Sister Mary Catherine gasped between coughs. "And it's the baby!" "Alive," Grace said, carefully unwrapping the blankets to reveal a tiny girl, perhaps 3 months old, red-faced from crying, but apparently unharmed. "She's alive. You saved her." "Sarah's child," Sister Mary Catherine whispered, then dissolved into another fit of coughing. Grace froze. "What did you say?" "Sarah Morrison's daughter, born 6 months ago in Philadelphia. Mother Agnes had the baby brought here 2 months back. Said the mother had died in childbirth. But I knew Sarah was alive because I saw the letter. Mother Agnes keeps all the letters from the children we send away. This baby, she's your blood, Grace, your niece." The world tilted again. Grace looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the shape of the nose that was somehow familiar. Her sister's child, Sarah's daughter. "My niece," she whispered. Behind them, the orphanage roof collapsed with a roar like thunder, sending sparks and embers high into the sky. The crowd that had gathered gasped and pulled back, but the fire was contained to that one building now. The children were safe. The nearby structures were not threatened. It could have been so much worse. Marshal Grady pushed through the crowd, his face grim. "Eli, I need you." Found fresh horse tracks leading away from the back of the building. "Looks like someone set this fire deliberately, then rode off. I need your tracking skills." "Go," Grace said before Eli could protest. "I'll take care of Sister Mary Catherine and the children. Go find who did this." Eli hesitated, his eyes searching her face. Then he nodded and followed the marshal, moving with that peculiar grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. The next hours passed in a blur of organized chaos. Grace helped the town doctor examine all 23 children for smoke inhalation and burns. Miraculously, most were unharmed beyond being frightened. 2 had minor burns, quickly treated. Sister Mary Catherine's injuries were more serious. She had 2nd-degree burns on her hands and legs, and her lungs had taken in enough smoke that the doctor worried about lasting damage. But she was alive, and she was conscious, and when Grace held her hand, she squeezed back. "Thank you for telling me about Sarah," Grace said quietly, once the doctor had moved on to examine another child. "About her daughter." "I should have told you years ago," Sister Mary Catherine said, her voice hoarse and weak. "I knew what Mother Agnes was doing was wrong. I knew about the money, about the children being sold. But I was afraid of losing my position, afraid of being cast out with nowhere to go. I'm ashamed of my cowardice." "You went into a burning building to save a baby," Grace said. "That's not cowardice, that's courage." "Better late than never, I suppose." The older nun managed a weak smile. "Grace, there's something else you need to know. The letters Mother Agnes kept, they're in a locked box in her office. 3rd desk drawer, hidden under a false bottom. You'll find records there, names of all the children we placed, where they were sent, how much money changed hands, evidence of everything." "I'll find it," Grace promised, "and I'll make sure those children are found and brought home if they want to come." By late afternoon, Eli returned with Marshal Grady. Their faces told Grace everything she needed to know before they spoke a word. "Colt Brennan," Grady said wearily, "found him at his father's ranch, reeking of kerosene, burns on his hands from setting the fire. Fool didn't even try to hide it. Said he was teaching you a lesson about asking questions above your station." "Where is he now?" Grace asked. "Jail, along with his father and Deacon Thatcher and Mother Agnes. Got the whole family locked up. Judge is coming from Denver tomorrow to handle arraignment." "What about the other children Mother Agnes sent away?" Grace could not stop thinking about Sarah, about her half-sister working in some factory, believing no one cared whether she lived or died. Can we find them? We can try, Grady said. But Grace, you need to understand, some of those children have been gone for years. Some might not want to be found. Some might have died. I have to try, Grace said. Sarah especially. She's my sister. And that baby, she looked down at the infant sleeping in her arms. That baby needs her mother. Eli spoke for the first time since returning. Marshall, what's the legal situation with Grace's property? Can Brennan still make a claim on it? Not legally, no. Will's clear. Land belongs to Grace, free and simple. But Brennan's got money for appeals and lawyers. Could tie it up in court for years if he's determined enough. Then we need to make sure the land is protected, Grace said, an idea forming in her mind. Eli, your cabin, it's on your own property, right? Such as it is. 40 acres I homesteaded 15 years back. Not much, but it's mine. Where is it exactly? About a mile north of your land. Well, Grace looked at Marshall Grady. If I were to marry someone, would my property become joint property under territorial law? Grady's eyebrows rose. Generally speaking, yes. Both spouses would have claim to property acquired before or during the marriage. Why do you ask? Grace took a deep breath and turned to Eli. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. Because I want to propose a partnership. A marriage of convenience, if you're willing. Your land and mine together would be enough to negotiate with the railroad directly. We'd have leverage, protection, and Brennan couldn't claim I'm an incompetent woman who needs a guardian if I have a husband. Eli stared at her for a long moment. Grace, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I want to. You saved my life. You've stood by me when no one else would. You've shown me more respect and kindness in 2 days than I received in 11 years at that convent. I'm not asking for a real marriage, just a legal partnership. Unless, she faltered, suddenly uncertain, unless you don't want to be tied to someone like me. Someone like you, Eli repeated slowly. You mean someone brave and smart and strong enough to run into a burning building? Someone who stands up to corrupt authorities and fights for children who can't fight for themselves? Yeah, Grace. I'd be honored to be tied to someone like you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. There's a preacher over at the Baptist church, Marshall Grady said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I could fetch him if you're serious about this. I'm serious, Grace said. So am I, Eli agreed. They were married an hour later in the marshal's office, with Marshall Grady and the town doctor as witnesses. The preacher, a young man named Reverend Mills, kept glancing nervously at Eli's knives and guns, but he performed the ceremony without protest. Grace wore her borrowed buckskins. Eli wore the same clothes he had been wearing since she met him. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. But when Eli took her hand and said, I do, his grip was warm and steady. And when Grace repeated the words back to him, she meant them more than she had ever meant anything in her life. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Mills said. You may kiss the bride. Eli looked at Grace, a question in his eyes. She nodded, just slightly. He leaned down, mindful of their height difference, and kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. It was not a passionate kiss. It was something better. It was a promise. Well, Marshall Grady said, that ought to complicate Garrett Brennan's legal strategy considerably. He had no idea how right he was. The news spread through Stillwater like wildfire. The fat postulant nun had married the mountain man. Some people were scandalized. Some were intrigued. Some whispered that it was all a scheme to steal land from the church, but no one could deny that it was legal. And more importantly, no one could deny that Eli Blackwood was not a man to be trifled with. That night, Grace and Eli returned to his cabin with Little Bear and the baby. Sister Mary Catherine was staying in town under the doctor's care. The other children from the orphanage had been distributed among various families, willing to take them in temporarily. It was not ideal, but it was better than leaving them in the burned-out husk of St. Mary's. At the cabin, Eli started a fire while Grace tried to figure out how to care for an infant. She had no experience with babies. The child needed milk, but there was no wet nurse nearby. Little Bear, surprisingly, proved helpful. Cherokee women make a feeding tube from deer hide, he said. I've seen it. We can use goat's milk if we have a goat. I have a goat, Eli said. She's stubborn and mean, but she gives good milk. Between the three of them, they managed to fashion a feeding system that worked. The baby, who they learned from Sister Mary Catherine's records was named Hope, drank eagerly and then fell asleep in Grace's arms. Grace sat by the fire, rocking the tiny body, marveling at the weight of this new responsibility. You're good with her, Eli observed from where he sat mending a piece of harness leather. I'm terrified, Grace admitted. I don't know what I'm doing. None of us do when we start, but you're trying. That's what matters. Little Bear had already fallen asleep on a pile of blankets near the fire, exhausted from the day's trauma. Grace looked around the cabin, at this space that was now somehow her home, and felt overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just 2 days. Eli, she said quietly, about this marriage. I meant what I said about it being a partnership. I don't expect, that is, I won't ask you to. Grace, Eli set down his work and looked at her. I know what you're trying to say, and I appreciate the consideration. This cabin has 2 rooms upstairs. You and the baby can have one. Little Bear and I will share the other. We'll work together, but I won't pressure you for anything more than that. You have my word. Or relief in something that might have been disappointment warred in Grace's chest. Thank you. That said, Eli continued, I want you to know something. This might have started as a marriage of convenience, but I meant my vows. You're my wife now, and I protect what's mine. I'm not property, Grace said, but there was no heat in it. No, you're not. You're a partner, an equal. But that doesn't change the fact that anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you so kind to me? Because you deserve kindness, Eli said simply. Because you're worth protecting. And because, he hesitated, then continued, because I haven't felt this alive in 15 years. Since I lost my family, you've reminded me what it means to have something to fight for. Before Grace could respond, a sound from outside made Eli tense. He was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Grace held Hope closer, her heart pounding. Someone's coming, Eli said quietly. Multiple riders, stay here. He slipped out the door before Grace could protest. She heard voices outside, low and tense. Then Eli returned, and behind him came Marshal Grady and another man Grace did not recognize. This is Red Sky Walker, Eli said, elder of the Cherokee people in this region. He heard about what happened today. He wants to talk. Red Sky Walker was a man of perhaps 70 years, his face weathered and wise, his long silver hair braided down his back. He moved with the careful dignity of age and authority. When he looked at Grace, his eyes were sharp and assessing. He spoke in Cherokee. Eli translated. He says the spirits have been restless. They told him a woman in black robes would come, a woman who carries the weight of 2 people's sorrows. He says you are that woman. Grace shifted Hope in her arms. I don't understand. More Cherokee, more translation. He says you carry the child of a woman who was lost. You stand beside a man who has lost his way, and you yourself are lost, but finding your path. He says this is significant, that the spirits are watching. I don't believe in spirits, Grace said, though her voice was less certain than she meant it to be. Red Skywalker smiled, and Eli translated his response. He says it doesn't matter if you believe in them. They believe in you. The old man stepped forward and placed his hand on Hope's head, speaking words Grace could not understand. Then he turned to Little Bear, who had woken and was watching with wide eyes. More Cherokee, softer this time, almost tender. He's blessing the children, Eli said, asking spirits to protect them and guide them to their destinies. Finally, Red Skywalker turned to Eli and Grace together. He spoke for a long time, his voice rising and falling like water over stones. When he finished, Eli's face was unreadable. What did he say? Grace asked. He says we are bound now, you and I, not just by white man's law, but by something older. He says, Morning Star, my mother sent you to me, that you are her gift, her way of telling me to stop mourning and start living. He says, Eli's voice grew rough. He says she forgives me for not being there, for failing to save her and little Dove. She forgives me, and I need to forgive myself. Tears streamed down Eli's face the first time Grace had seen him cry. Red Skywalker put his hand on Eli's shoulder and spoke again, gentler now. He says, I've been dead inside for 15 years, but you've brought me back to life. And for that, the Cherokee people will stand with us against any who try to harm us. Tell him thank you, Grace said. Tell him I'll do my best to honor that trust. Eli translated, and Red Skywalker nodded. He spoke one more time, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Grace. What did he say? Grace asked after he was gone. He said you think your body is a burden, but to him, to the Cherokee, a woman with substance is a woman with strength, a woman who can survive hard winters, bear healthy children, work the land. He says in the old way, you would be considered beautiful, desirable, worthy. He says white people have forgotten what really matters. Grace could not speak. She simply held Hope and let the tears fall. That night, after Little Bear was asleep and Hope was settled in a makeshift cradle, Grace and Eli sat by the fire in companionable silence. Finally, Grace spoke. I need to go to Philadelphia to find Sarah. I know. Will you come with me? Where you go, I go. We're partners now. The land? Little Bear can watch the land. He's smart and capable. And Red Skywalker will keep an eye on things. We'll leave in 3 days. Give Sister Mary Catherine time to heal enough to write down everything she knows about where Sarah was sent. 3 days, Grace repeated. It seemed both too long and not long enough. Grace, Eli said, there's something I need to tell you about today when you ran toward that fire. I know it was foolish. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen, and when I grabbed you, when I said I wouldn't watch another woman I cared about die, I meant it. I care about you, Grace. This might have started as a practical arrangement, but it's becoming something more, at least for me. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. For me too, she whispered. I didn't expect it. I didn't think anyone could ever, but you see me, really see me, not the fat body or the shame or the failure. You see me. I see a woman worth knowing, Eli said, worth protecting, worth, he hesitated, worth loving, maybe, if you'd allow it. I don't know how to be loved, Grace said honestly. I don't know if I'm ready. Then we'll learn together. No rush, no pressure, just possibility. Grace nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Eli stood and banked the fire. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we start building our future. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. Marshal Grady brought news that Mother Agnes and Deacon Thatcher had been formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and child trafficking. Colt Brennan faced charges of assault, attempted murder, and arson. Garrett Brennan, as the patriarch, was being investigated for conspiracy. The trial would take months, maybe years. But the wheels of justice were turning. Within days, she recovered enough to provide detailed records of every child sent away from St. Mary's over the past decade. 17 children in total, some as young as 8 years old, all sent to factories, mines, or wealthy homes as servants, all paid for with blood money that went into Mother Agnes's coffers. Grace and Eli spent hours poring over the records, making plans. They would start with Sarah, who was closest and whose location was most certain. Then they would work through the list, one child at a time, offering them a choice. Come home to Montana, to the land Grace now owned and the house she planned to build. Or stay where they were, if they had found happiness. But at least they would know someone cared enough to come looking. On the third day, Widow Abigail Cole came to the cabin with an offer. I'll watch the baby, she said, and Little Bear, if he wants to stay. You two go find that girl. Bring her home. We can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I raised 6 children of my own. One more baby won't kill me, and the boy can help around my place, earn his keep. Go. Do what needs doing. That afternoon, Grace and Eli rode out of Stillwater heading east. They carried enough supplies for 2 weeks, money from Grace's newly released inheritance, and letters of introduction from Marshal Grady. It was 1,000 miles to Philadelphia. In 1888, that meant weeks of travel by train and coach. But Grace was ready. For the first time in her life, she was moving towards something instead of running away. The journey east was an education in itself. Grace had spent 11 years behind convent walls, sheltered from the world. Now she saw that world in all its complexity. Cities filled with immigrants and industry, farmlands stretching to the horizon, mountains and rivers and plains, poverty and wealth existing side by side. And everywhere they went, people stared. At Eli's buckskins and long hair, at Grace's size and practical clothing, at the sight of them together, this unlikely pair. Some stares were hostile, some curious. Grace learned to meet them all, with her head high, learned to saw him apologizing for existing. Eli was a patient teacher. He showed her how to negotiate with ticket agents, how to handle money, how to navigate unfamiliar cities. He never made her feel stupid or sheltered. He simply gave her information and let her learn. 2 weeks after leaving Montana, they arrived in Philadelphia. The city was overwhelming, noise and crowds and buildings so tall they blocked out the sky. The smell of coal smoke and industry, and too many people living too close together. Grace felt herself shrinking, wanting to hide, but Eli's presence beside her kept her grounded. Sister Mary Catherine's records indicated Sarah had been sent to work at the Riverside Textile Mill on the northern edge of the city. They found the building easily enough. It was a massive brick structure, belching black smoke into the gray sky. The sound of machinery was deafening, even from outside. At the front office, a clerk looked at them with undisguised disdain. "We're looking for Sarah Morrison," Grace said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "We have reason to believe she works here. We don't give out information about our workers." Eli stepped forward, his size suddenly seeming much more significant in the small office. "The lady asked nicely. I suggest you cooperate." The clerk paled and shuffled through some papers. "Sarah Morrison, yes. She's in the weaving room, second floor. But you can't just—" They were already walking toward the stairs. The weaving room was a vision of hell. 200 looms operated by women and children, the noise so loud Grace could barely think. The air was thick with cotton dust that made her lungs burn. The workers looked like ghosts, pale and thin, their clothes worn, their faces blank with exhaustion. Grace scanned the room, looking for a face she had never seen but might somehow recognize. And then she saw her, a young woman at a loom near the far wall. 21 years old, painfully thin, with dark hair and a face that looked hauntingly like their father's. She had his nose, his jawline, his eyes. Grace knew her instantly. "Sarah," she breathed. The woman looked up, startled by hearing her name in this place where workers were only numbers. Her eyes widened when she saw Grace approaching, widened further when she saw Eli behind her. "Sarah Morrison?" Grace had to shout to be heard over the machinery. "Who's asking?" The voice was hoarse, damaged by years of breathing cotton dust. "My name is Grace, Grace Morrison. I'm your sister." Sarah's face went blank with shock. "I don't have a sister. My family is dead." "No," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "No, they're not. I'm here. I came to find you. I came to bring you home." "I don't have a home." "You do now. Please, Sarah. Come outside where we can talk. Please." Sarah looked at her loom, at the work she would be punished for leaving, at the foreman watching from across the room. Then she looked back at Grace, at this impossible sister who had appeared like a ghost from a past she had tried to forget. "You are really my sister?" "I am. I swear it. Our father was James Morrison. He died when you were 11. Mother Agnes took you from your mother, Patricia, and sold you to this place. But I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know you existed until 3 days ago. But now I do, and I'm here, and I want you to come home." Sarah stood slowly. The foreman started toward them, shouting something Grace could not hear over the machinery. Eli intercepted him with a hand on his chest and said something that made the man back away. Outside in the marginally cleaner air, Sarah leaned against the brick wall and stared at Grace. "You're really her, the daughter from Father's first marriage, the one Mother talked about. She said you abandoned us, said you didn't want a new family." "I didn't know about you," Grace repeated. "Mother Agnes lied. She lied to both of us. But I know the truth now. And you have a daughter, Sarah, a baby girl named Hope. She's alive and well and living in Montana, waiting for her mother." Sarah slid down the wall, her legs giving out. Hope. They told me she died. They took her away right after she was born, and they said she died. She's alive. I promise you, I've been taking care of her. She has your eyes. Sarah sobbed, great heaving gasps that sounded like they were tearing her apart. Grace knelt beside her, this stranger who was her sister, and held her while she cried. They stayed like that for a long time. Two women who had both been lied to and used and discarded, finding each other at last. Finally, Sarah looked up. Why would you do this? Come all this way for someone you don't even know? Because family matters, Grace said. Because children matter. Because you deserve to know someone cared whether you lived or died. And because I have land now and money and a home, and I want to build something. A place where children like us, children who have been thrown away, can be safe. But I can't do it alone. I need help. I need family. I'm nobody, Sarah said. I'm just a factory girl with ruined lungs and no education. You're my sister, Grace said firmly. You're Hope's mother. You're somebody, and you're coming home with us. It took 3 more days to arrange Sarah's release from the factory. They had to pay off her debt for room and board, a debt that had been carefully calculated to keep her trapped forever. Grace paid it without hesitation. She also paid the debts of 5 other young women who Sarah said had been kind to her, giving them the choice to come to Montana or use the money to start fresh somewhere else. 2 of them chose Montana. Their names were Emma and Kate, both 16, both orphans who had been working in the factory for 4 years. They looked at Grace with disbelief when she explained what she was offering. A home, Emma said. A real home? Where we don't have to work 16 hours a day? A real home, Grace confirmed. You'll work, but fair work, helping build something instead of being ground down by machinery. And you'll be safe, I promise you that. The journey back to Montana took longer with 3 additional people, but it gave Grace time to know her sister. Sarah was quiet at first, broken by years of hardship, but slowly, day by day, she began to open up. She talked about their father, about memories Grace had never known. She talked about her mother, Patricia, who had been weak and fearful but not actively cruel. She talked about the factory, about watching friends die from disease and accidents, about the foreman who took liberties with the youngest girls. And she asked about Hope, about her daughter. Grace described every detail she could remember: the baby's tiny fingers, the way she squeaked when she was hungry, the dark hair that curled at the ends just like Sarah's. I thought she was dead, Sarah said one night as they camped under the stars. I thought I'd killed her by being born myself. That's what they told me, that I was so weak and sinful that my baby couldn't survive. They lied, Grace said, about everything. But that's over now. You're going to hold your daughter again. You're going to watch her grow up. You're going to have a future. When they finally arrived back in Stillwater 6 weeks after leaving, a crowd had gathered. News of their journey had spread. People wanted to see if it was true, if the fat ex-nun and the mountain man had really traveled across the country to rescue factory workers. Widow Abigail stood at the front of the crowd holding Hope. When Sarah saw her daughter, she made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and ran forward on shaking legs. She took the baby in her arms, and Hope, who did not know her mother but sensed something important was happening, reached up and touched Sarah's face. "My baby," Sarah whispered. "My Hope." The crowd watched in silence. Even the most hardened skeptics found themselves moved by the reunion. That night in Eli's cabin that was somehow also Grace's cabin now, they all gathered around the fire. Sarah held Hope and would not let her go. Little Bear had grown in the 6 weeks they were gone, more confident and stronger. Emma and Kate looked around nervously, still not quite believing this was real. "Tomorrow," Grace said, "we start building. Not just a house, a home. Morrison House, we'll call it. Big enough for all of us and any other child who needs a safe place to land. We'll teach them to read and write. We'll teach them practical skills. We'll teach them that their worth doesn't depend on what they look like or how much they weigh or whether society thinks they're valuable. We'll teach them they matter." "That's a big dream," Eli said, but he was smiling. "I've spent 11 years dreaming small," Grace said. "Living small, being small or trying to be. I'm done with that. I'm dreaming big now." "Then we'll build big," Eli said. He looked around at the unlikely family they had assembled. All of us together. The next year passed in a blur of construction and growth. Grace and Eli used her inheritance to build Morrison House on her land, a two-story structure large enough to house 30 people comfortably. They hired builders from town, but they also did much of the work themselves, along with Little Bear and Sarah and anyone else who wanted to help. Word spread. More children came. Some were brought by Marshall Grady, orphans from across the territory. Some came on their own, runaways from abusive situations. Grace turned no one away. If they needed a home, Morrison House was there. She also began corresponding with the other children from Sister Mary Catherine's list. Some wrote back, some did not. 3 more eventually made the journey to Montana. Others sent word they were happy where they were, but grateful to know someone cared. The trial of Mother Agnes and the Brennans dragged on for months. Eventually, justice was served. Mother Agnes was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Deacon Thatcher received 20. Colt Brennan got 7 years for arson. Garrett Brennan, the patriarch, managed to avoid prison through expensive lawyers, but he was financially ruined by the legal fees and settlements. His empire crumbled. His name became synonymous with corruption. Grace watched it all from a distance, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction, just sadness for all the wasted years, all the broken children, all the cruelty done in God's name. But she also felt hope, because Morrison House was thriving, because Sarah was healthy and happy, watching Hope take her first steps, because Little Bear had been reunited with distant Cherokee relatives and now moved between two worlds with confidence, because Emma and Kate had discovered they had talent for teaching and were helping younger children learn to read, and because Grace herself had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She no longer wore the habit. She dressed in practical skirts and boots, her hair braided simply. Her body was still large, probably always would be, but she had stopped seeing it as an enemy. It was strong. It could work all day, building and teaching and caring for children. It could lift heavy loads and dig in gardens and chop wood. It was her body, and it was enough. More than enough if Eli's eyes were to be believed. Their marriage had remained platonic for the first 6 months, both of them too busy and too uncertain to change the arrangement. But slowly, inevitably, things shifted. A brush of hands while working together, a shared smile across the dinner table, Eli's arm around her shoulders on a cold night, no longer just practical warmth, but something more. One evening in early spring, a year after they married, Grace found Eli on the porch of Morrison House, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Beautiful," he said as she joined him. "Yes," she agreed, not sure if he meant the view or something else. "Grace," Eli said, "I need to tell you something. This past year, working beside you, building this place, watching you become the woman you were always meant to be, I've fallen in love with you. Completely. Irrevocably. I know we said this was just a partnership, and I'll respect that if you want to keep it that way, but I needed you to know, you're not just my wife on paper. You're the woman I love." Grace's heart felt too large for her chest. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easier than she expected. "I think I've loved you since the moment you turned your back at the lake, since the moment you saw me as a person worth protecting instead of a problem to be solved." "Can I kiss you?" Eli asked. "Not on the forehead like at our wedding, a real kiss." "Yes," Grace breathed. He kissed her slowly, tenderly, a kiss that spoke of patience and respect and possibility. When they pulled apart, Grace was crying, but these were tears of joy. "I never thought anyone would want me like this," she whispered. "Then you underestimated yourself," Eli said. "You're extraordinary, Grace Blackwood, and I'm the luckiest man alive." That night, their marriage became real in every sense. Eli was gentle and patient, careful of Grace's inexperience and her lingering fears about her body. But he worshipped her with his hands and his mouth and his words, showing her that every curve, every softness, every inch of her was beautiful to him. Grace learned what it meant to be wanted, to be desired, to be loved not despite her body, but with it, as it was. The years that followed were not without challenges. Building Morrison House into a sustainable operation required constant work and fundraising. Some people in Stillwater never accepted what Grace was doing, muttering about wasted charity and spoiled children. There were lean winters and difficult decisions, But there was also joy. Hope grew into a bright, curious child. Sarah met and married a widower from town, a kind man who treated her daughter as his own. Little Bear became Thomas Gray Cloud again, the first Cherokee student to attend the Territorial University. Emma and Kate both became certified teachers. The children who came to Morrison House learned and grew, and eventually left to build lives of their own. But they always knew they had a place to return to. Grace never lost the weight. She stopped trying. Instead, she focused on being healthy and strong and useful. And somehow, without her noticing exactly when it happened, she stopped thinking of herself as fat. She was simply Grace. Wife, mother figure to dozens of children, builder, teacher, fighter for those who could not fight for themselves. 5 years after that night at Crystal Lake, on a crisp autumn evening, Grace stood on the porch of Morrison House with Eli beside her. The house was full of light and laughter, 32 children currently in residence, all fed and safe and loved. "Do you ever regret it?" Eli asked. "Leaving the convent? Walking away from the religious life?" Grace thought about it seriously. "I thought being a nun meant serving God. But what I learned is that serving God means serving people. These children are my calling. This work is my prayer. I'm more faithful now than I ever was in that habit." "Your father would be proud," Eli said. "I think he would be," Grace agreed. She looked down at her hands, calloused and strong from years of hard work. "I spent so long thinking I was worthless, that my body made me unlovable, that I was a burden God couldn't accept. But I was wrong. I was always worthy. I just needed to find people who could see it." "I saw it from the beginning," Eli said. "That first night at the lake, when you were certain you were dying and worthless and disgusting, I saw a woman fighting to survive. A woman brave enough to ask for help. A woman worth saving." "You did save me," Grace said. "But more than that, you taught me to save myself." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the Montana mountains. In the distance, they could hear the sound of the Northern Pacific Railroad, which had finally come through 2 years ago. Grace had negotiated a fair price for the right-of-way across her land, money that now funded Morrison House's operations. Garrett Brennan had died penniless and forgotten. Mother Agnes had died in prison. Their schemes and cruelties had come to nothing, but Grace and Eli had built something that would last. "I love you," Grace said. "I love you too," Eli replied. "My goddess, my Grace." Inside Morrison House, children laughed and played. Sarah tucked Hope into bed with a lullaby. Emma and Kate planned the next day's lessons. Little Bear, home from university for the weekend, told stories of Cherokee legends to an audience of wide-eyed younger children. And Grace Blackwood, who had once believed she was too fat to be loved by God or man, stood in the home she had built and knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, loved exactly as she was. The end.